Privilege doesn't stay invisible forever. Eventually, it costs everyone something. This Leo eclipse just sent someone an expensive bill. And today I'm breaking down exactly how an astrological titan responded and why. But this is only the beginning. In part two, I'm going to teach you what kuleana, the Hawaiian value of responsibility, actually asks of us instead of defense. And in part three, we're going to get personal. I'll walk you through exactly what this eclipse is asking you to release house by house, straight from my book. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss any of these for this total Leo solar eclipse. I'm Leslie Tagorda, business astrologer and creator of the Astrobrand method. If you're here for astrology that doesn't flinch from hard conversations, I encourage you to hit subscribe. I'm doing more of this kind of digging. Okay. This is not breaking news anymore. If you have been part of the astrological world, you know that a Titan in astrology just showed us their true colors and what the old version of Leo leadership looks like when it crumbles. Early last week, Stephen Forrest, the head of the evolutionary astrology, he's such a titan in the astrological world, said the N-word during a podcast with his podcast host, Ricky Williams, a Black man. Now, this really erupted in the astrological world, not only because he used the actual N-word with the hard R to his Black co-host and making light of how back in the day, in the 80s and 90s, that it was much easier to use comedy to talk about racism. Now, this shook up the astrological world, not just from the Black community, but from the community that he built in his own school. Now, because we have been in this eclipse energy with the South Node in Leo representing the shadows of privilege, the shadows of monarchy, the shadows of rulership, entitlement, and how this impacted and struck a chord in the astrological world, and exactly what not to do in order to make repair. Now, the thing is, as astrologers, whether you are a titan like Stephen Forrest or an everyday astrologer giving guidance to your clients who are requesting insight, we hold a place of power and privilege. And when we don't recognize our own power and privilege, this is where we can do so much harm. And so today I want to look at exactly what happened, what didn't happen, how UAC, the United Astrology Conference, responded, and how he responded to that response. Now, the fallout on social media has been huge with all different types of perspectives that it's just really interesting as an observer to watch how people respond, because our response actually shows a lot of our own values and a lot of our own biases and privileges. Now, while he did harm, there were ways that he could have made things better instead of making them worse. So let's take a look at first his response and do a line by line case study of what not to do. And then we'll take a look at the astrology of what was supporting this energetic blowout. So before we go into his response and how everything went sideways, I want to take a look at the astrology of this particular eclipse. Now, this event isn't random, but I don't think anybody in the astrological community knew that some Titan in our own industry was going to come down. I know that there are astrologers looking at who's going to be taking this hit. And this guy, the cosmos, is structured around exposure and reckoning right now. So our total eclipse happens on August 12th at 10:36 a.m. Pacific. Now, if you happen to live in Iceland, oh my gosh, I totally wish I was in Iceland to be able to see this total eclipse. Iceland and parts of Europe are going to be able to see this total eclipse. Even if you're in parts of like the northern United States, like Alaska and everything, you'll be able to see some of this partial eclipse. It happens at 10:36 a.m. Pacific. Now, the eclipse happens at 20 degrees of Leo. The sun and the moon meet, and it's only 9 degrees away from the south node, which is currently at that critical point of 29 degrees Leo. Remember, the nodes just moved into Aquarius and Leo. Now, collectively, wherever the south node is where we need to flush out, where we need to expose, where there's a big cost that is going to drain. And Leo being the sign of privilege, of royalty, of these kinds of people that we uphold, gurus and titans, the people that we put up on these pedestals, the people that we look at up in the ivory towers. When this south node is coming for that Leo energy, it's going to be pulling gurus, titans down. We also have Mercury and Jupiter in Leo. So we have a lot of Leo energy, Jupiter again expanding. Now, Pluto is still sitting, and Pluto and the North Node are still sitting at the bookends of Aquarius. Pluto at 3 degrees, North Node at 29 degrees of Aquarius. And this is wherever we have the North Node is where we are stretching and where we are going. And so you've heard me talk about the age of Aquarius before and how we are looking for a new type of circular leadership. There's no room for unethical or gurus who just don't understand their privilege. And so I've been talking a lot about kuleana. It's one of the values that I live by, and it's one of the values that I weave through all of my practice and my teaching. Kuleana is a Hawaiian terminology for responsibility, accountability, and just like what is your privilege to do the right thing and to make repair when things go wrong. And in this instance, to me, kuleana is coming so strong. And this idea of kuleana about doing the right thing when you've done wrong, that part of accountability, I have not been seeing it. Now, somebody had asked me on Instagram, because I've been putting all these comments in terms of like, how did the United Astrology Conference respond? Well, they had disinvited Stephen from the conference. And people, I was talking about a timely and reciprocal response. Now, somebody was asking me, well, is there anything that he could have said to make repair? And I think that he could have done things so much differently. But alas, with his Leo in Pluto, he's like Pluto and Leo generation, his Pluto and Leo and his he has a lot of fixed energy in his chart. He just dug in. His fragility showed up so hard, really wanting to defend himself instead of creating reciprocal repair, restoring the relationships that have caused harm. Now, maybe we can see this in the eclipse chart. We have a bunch of oppositions. We have Neptune and Venus in her home sign of Libra, Neptune in the sign of Aries, Neptune wanting to dissolve all of those Aries leadership power structures, Venus wanting to create bonds. And when we think about a Neptune Venus opposition, both of these energies want to create bonds, want to work together. But there was energy for this. Alas, that energy wasn't being used well. And maybe it was the Pluto opposite Mercury and Jupiter energy that was pulling apart people. Some people say that this was a witch hunt and a mob hunt against Stephen Forrest. I don't agree. Well, maybe Gen Z, and Gen Z can be like really cancel culture. And I don't believe in cancel culture. Not all Gen Z are cancel culture, but in general, as a whole, they're like off with their heads. And I don't believe in that either. But Pluto here in Aquarius for the people, giving power to the people, giving power to quote unquote the mob, the collective, going against the tech titan, represents, not the tech titan, I'm sorry, the astrological titan, Stephen Forrest, maybe represented by Jupiter and Mercury. He's been at the top of this ivory tower as this teacher, as this philosopher of the, evolutionary astrology. Thousands of students that he has cultivated this culture, this community of evolutionary astrologers. Not only does he owe an apology to the Black community that he harmed by using the N-word, but he also owes an apology to his community that he has totally let down and not led by shining example. So this Pluto, Jupiter, and Mercury opposition really pulling apart, and like how are we going to use our words to defend our entitlement? Mercury in Leo, the shadows of that Mercury in Leo, instead of trying to create understanding and curiosity of looking at the people that we harmed and trying to understand how we harmed them, even if, as Stephen said, he doesn't believe that he did anything wrong. So we'll take a look at his actual response. And so this is a super, super, super tight energy. We also have Mars at the time of the eclipse, not the time of the event, but the time of the eclipse, Mars having just moved into the sign of Cancer. So there's all this unexpressed like kind of resentment that's bubbling up, that this eclipse, even though this event happened, a week and a half before the actual eclipse, this imprint of the eclipse is so strong. And then we have this beautiful grand trine between Uranus, Pluto, and Venus, all in air signs, really giving voice to the collective, everybody coming out with their opinions. And again, just watching and observing people's responses really say a lot to people's values and biases in themselves. So let's dig into exactly what happened with Stephen Forrest. So somewhere, I think it's August 3rd or August 4th, Stephen Forrest, again, was on a podcast, his own podcast with Ricky Williams, and they were talking about shadow work. And, shadow work obviously is going deep and dredging up things that we haven't seen. And I said earlier in that process, he said the N-word. And you can see the video. Well, I think actually the video has been edited, so the question is like, why did they release that video with the N-word? You can see Ricky Williams there. He's like, just like nervously kind of laughing. And when we think about that, Ricky Williams, even though he's a Heisman Trophy Award winning footballer, he is a Black man speaking to a much older, a much more established white astrologer. The power dynamic, I'm sorry, is not equal there. And Stephen Forrest just does not recognize his own privilege, his own biases when he's speaking, and is not recognizing the social cues from Ricky. And so I don't know why they released that podcast, or maybe there was actual intention in releasing that podcast and exposing the true colors of Stephen Forrest. Again, for me, I'm just like, where I'm an observer here. I'm not a student of Stephen Forrest. I appreciate evolutionary astrology. I don't have a personal connection. I'm really just watching this as an observer. But Stephen Forrest then did not make a response. Okay, so when we're doing repair, it requires two things: a timely and reciprocal response. timely, meaning you don't drag your feet, you don't wait to make a response. You gather in your people, get different people's opinions, try to understand the harm that was done, even if you don't believe that you created the harm, which he clearly didn't believe that he didn't make the harm. Repair is based on whether or not you want to keep and value the relationships for Stephen Forrest, the Black community, and for his school. Now, his response showed that he didn't have any regard to that relationship. That's the reciprocity part, the regard to, is the relationship more valuable than my wounded ego because I did something wrong and now people think I'm the bad guy. Okay. And so I'm going to post this. I'll get Jeff in the production to post word for word his response that he put on social media, Stephen Forrest's response. And then we're going to go line by line how everything in his response was actually not an apology based on repair, timely and reciprocal. So we already know it's not timely. He waited three days until he responded, did not take any advice. I've heard from a lot of my astrological friends that they had reached out to him to give him advice on how to respond, and he totally just did not heed anybody's words. So this is his response from social media. I am appalled by the upset my words have created. I apologize for my lack of judgment. In discussing racism with my friend, Ricky Williams, I explicitly referenced the demonic N-word. I apologize for that moment of injudiciousness. Cancel me if you want, but don't call me a racist. That's simply not true. So let's take this apart line by line. First line, I am appalled by the upset my words have created. Okay, so here he's apologizing for the reaction, not for the harm. Okay, it's like, okay, you got mad at me, so I'm gonna apologize that you got mad at me, not for like, I'm sorry that I made you mad. I'm sorry that I upset you. Instead, I'm upset by the words, I'm appalled by the upset, the collective upset my words have created. He centers his own discomfort with the fallout, not the actual people impacted by the word. Second line, I apologize for my lack of judgment. Now, here he reframes a specific harmful act as a vague character flaw, lack of judgment. He depersonalizes it when repair is very interpersonal, very reciprocal. It's a lapse, not a choice with real impact. Third line, in discussing racism with my friend, Ricky Williams, again, the Black football astrologer, professional ex-football astrologer, I explicitly referenced the demonic N-word. Now, this, again, is like, well, I have a Black friend, so I'm not racist, is basically what he's doing here. By naming Ricky Williams by name is a deflection. I have a Black friend. Using a relationship as a shield, as a protector, rather than reckoning with the harm. Fourth line, I apologize for that moment of injudiciousness. Now, he repeats the minimizing move, a moment, injudiciousness, small, one time, not a pattern, not a reckoning. Now, this is clearly a pattern. Chris Brennan from the Astrology podcast had also released a social media post line by line, kind of looking at just certain things that Stephen Forrest has said in the past, even admitting that until he was 30 years old, and now 30 years old, that's a whole Saturn cycle. You are clearly an adult at 30 years old, that he didn't even realize his bias was so strong, his racism so strong, that Black people could be smart. Now, that's a shock to me, because by the time you're 30 years old, those patterns are so deeply ingrained, and that if you haven't done your own quote unquote shadow work, your own education about your internal biases, then oh boy, this is like you're wielding a nuclear bomb with your entitlement and your privilege that Not good. Okay. So I apologize for that moment of injudiciousness. He's not recognizing that this is a real reckoning. His last line: cancel me if you want, but don't call me a racist. That's simply not true. Now, here he pivots from apology, from attempted apology, to self defense. He's not listening, he's not curious, and he's already decided what's true about himself and just like close the door on hearing otherwise. Like I said, I have friends that are personal students and friends of him that reached out to him that he just would not reply, would not respond, would not listen to their advice. And so this is his fragile ego responding that we're going to be talking about a little bit more. Now, again, I'm going to be really clear. I'm not into cancel culture. I do believe that repair can be done, but repair has to be timely and it has to be reciprocal, meaning valuing the relationship to undo the harm. And Stephen Forrest, again, I'm not in cancel culture, but he did not give a choice because he didn't do any of this repair, timely or reciprocal. So the UAC, the United Astrology Conference, which is happening in September, where I'm a new speaker coming up, a lot of people have decided to not go because Stephen Forrest, his presence is going to still be there. And UAC had posted an official formal letter disinviting Stephen Forrest. But at that moment of that disinvitation, I kid you not, this is like I'm dealing with like a 5-year-old. I think my 10-year-old is even more mature than this response. But in that formal, disinvitation, Stephen Forrest literally is like, well, I'm going to disinvite myself first. Basically, like, you can't break up with me. I'm going to break up with you first. And, he acknowledges that his presence is going to be too much of a distraction, and he disinvited himself, supposedly, in response to UAC disinviting him. Now, there is this book called white fragility. And white fragility is a term coined by sociologist Dr. Robin DiAngelo. Now, white fragility, often this book goes to explain a state in which even minimum amounts of racial stress becomes intolerable, triggering defensive moves, anger, denial, argument, silence, all of this defense instead of opening up into curiosity. Now, that defensiveness is an incidental, and it's not only subject to white people. We can all fall into this fragility. This fragility's purpose is to protect our egos. And when you are a leader, when you are an astrologer, we're going to make mistakes. We are human. Okay. And this is the classic thing of what I'm guilty of it. I'm sure all of us are guilty to automatically kick in with our defenses because that's what we've been evolved to do, to protect ourselves, to protect our egos. But we have to do better now that we know better, to open up, get curious, educate ourselves on how we might have harmed, educate ourselves of our biases, educate ourselves on our unrecognized privileges, which we're going to go into that part 2, so that the defensiveness is, we can remove that defensiveness and start to create real conversations. Okay. When Stephen Forrest says, "Don't call me racist," this is a textbook example of white fragility. As we move into part 2, where I'm going to be talking about the different privileges that we have and how we can recognize those privileges and what happens when we don't recognize privileges. Now, this is exactly the types of conversations that I have with my communities in my Star Powered Circle and my Astrobrand certification, where I guide practitioners with weaving astrology into their practices. I start with power and privilege because you can't build authentic leadership, authentic relationships, or lead well without doing this deep foundational work first. We just graduated the second cohort of the Astrobrand certification, and third cohort applications are now open. It's a year-long program where I help you not only find your specific astrological voice, but I help you build your astrological business, all while learning an updated dialect of astrology for leadership, business, and branding. Now, as we look back on what not to do with the example of Stephen Forrest, the Leo the Leo South Node eclipse, that bill came due for him. When it comes due for all of us eventually, the real question is, what old fragile identity are you willing to release before the bill arrives? And that's kuleana. And that's what we're going to be talking in part 2. Okay, so let this be a lesson of what not to do when making repair. So thank you again. If this podcast has touched your heart, please share it with others. Please leave me a rating and review so we can reach the hearts of even more changemakers like you.